Hey, so you've probably noticed that we haven't uploaded anything in a while. I think the last one was like August 25th, but that's because we are now moving to a weekly schedule. I know it's not ideal, but the recording schedule that we have, we work on an A-day, B-day, so we would have to be making 2 a week. So it's just a lot easier for everybody, and it's a lot more efficient if we just make 1 every week and have those be very good. Now, obviously, we had a whole schedule. We're gonna see how that plays into the new schedule, but for now, everything's being worked out. But enjoy the announcements. Good morning, Kettle Run.
Good morning, Kettle Run. Today is Monday the 5th, and I am Federal Agent Felix. College representatives will be visiting Kettle Run during Cougar Block on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you would like to sign up for these, use the QR code on the screen now. Contact Ms. Raffi if you have any questions. There will be a senior class meeting for post-secondary planning. This will be during Cougar time on Wednesday, September 7th. This Friday is the 9/11 stair climb. Along with this, there will be a senior information night for four-year college planning on Tuesday, September 13th at 6 p.m. via Google Meet. To join the meeting, use the link in the description or call using the on-screen number and enter the on-screen PIN. Finally, there will be a college night for senior parents and students on Tuesday, September 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Laurel Ridge Community College.
Hi, I'm definitely being gang stalked. Here with the club news and sports. The deadline for level changes is September 8th at 3 p.m., which is the end of the first marking period. Please contact your counselor before the date to change it. There is a fall esports meeting this Tuesday after school in Lab 256. Afterwards, there is open lab practice available until 5:30 p.m. They need players for League of Legends, Rocket League, and Smash Bros. Ultimate. Contact Mr. Mergen for details at kmergen at fcps1.org. There's also a GSA meeting for anyone interested this Wednesday from 2:45 to 3:30 p.m. in room 225. Auditions for the student-directed one-act competition and the fall show are on Tuesday the 13th and Thursday the 15th from 2:35 to 3:30. Pick up an audition packet on the call board by the drama room. Anyone is welcome to audition. See Miss Elwell for more information. Unified is having their first meeting on this Wednesday after school. Contact Miss Willoughby for details. Back to you on set.
I'm tagging in one more time here just to warn you of the segment that's about to come up. Me, Hazen, and William, back last year, recorded a lot of footage in the last week that, because of a bunch of technical things, didn't get aired. One of those was a 1 hour long joke of the day, where we read off the longest joke in the world, Nate the Snake. I'm gonna air that whole thing on this episode. If I know you don't want to watch that, so you can click off. If you do want to watch that, by all means, go ahead. But I'm warning you now. You're about to see a 1 hour joke of the day. I think you just need to know that before it airs. Anyways, here's the segment.
Woo!
Here we go, brother.
Let's go.
We got this.
Let's go.
Welcome back to Joke of the Day with William Sanziano.
And Matthew Carlinger.
We got
a joke for you guys today. We got a joke for the day.
Joke of the Day.
Joke of the day. Okay, so this is gonna be, it's not that long, but I really like it, alright? Okay, so there's this man crawling through the desert, right?
Whoa.
It's pretty great. So he's crawling through the desert, and he's been trying to get his SUV. So he got this SUV, and he wanted to try a little bit of cross-country travel. He had all this fun zooming over the Badlands and through the sand, and he got lost. He hit a big rock, and then he couldn't get it started again. There are no cell towers anywhere nearby, so his cell phone was useless. He had no family. His parents died a few years ago in an auto accident, and his few friends had no idea he was out here. So he stayed with the car for a bit, like a day or so, but his one bottle of water, it ran out, and he was getting thirsty. He thought maybe he knew the direction back, now that he'd paid attention to the sun, and thought he'd figure out which way was north. So he decided to start walking, and he'd figured that he only had about 30 miles or so, and he'd be at the small town he'd gotten gas in. And he was thinking about walking at night to avoid the heat and sun, but based upon how dark it was before, and he had no flashlight, he was afraid that he'd like break a leg or step on a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
So, or maybe a normal snake, who knows? Mm-hmm. So he puts on some sunblock, and he puts the rest in his pocket for reapplication later. He brings an umbrella he had in the back of his SUV to give him a little bit of shade, pours the windshield wiper fluid into his water bottle in case he gets that desperate. He brings his pocket knife in case he finds a cactus that looks like it might have water, and he heads out in the direction he thinks is right. He walks for the entire day.
By the end of the day, he's really thirsty. He's been sweating all day and his lips are starting to crack. He's reapplied the sunblock twice and tried to stay under the umbrella, but he still feels sunburned. The windshield wiper fluid sloshing in the bottle in his pocket is really getting tempting now. He knows that it's mainly water and some ethanol and coloring, but he also knows that they add some kind of poison to it to keep people from drinking it. He wonders what the poison is and whether the poison would be worse than dying of thirst. He pushes on, trying to get to that small town before dark. By the end of the day, he starts getting worried. He figures he's been walking at least 3 miles an hour according to his watch for over 10 hours. That means that if his estimate was right, he should be close to the town. Unfortunately, he doesn't recognize any of this. He had to cross a dry creek bed a mile or two back, and he doesn't remember coming through it in the SUV. He figures that maybe he got his direction off just a little and that the dry creek bed was just off to one side of his path. He tells himself that he's close and that after dark he'll start seeing the town lights over one of these hills. That'll be all he needs. As if it gets dim enough that he starts stumbling over small rocks and things, he finds a spot and sits down to wait for full dark and the town lights. Full dark comes before he knows it. He must have dozed off. He stands back up and turns all the way around. He sees nothing but stars. He wakes up the next morning feeling absolutely lousy. His eyes are gummy and his mouth and nose feel like they're full of sand. He's so thirsty that he can't even swallow. He barely got any sleep because it was so cold. He'd forgotten how cold it got at night in the desert and hadn't noticed it the night before because he'd been in his car. He knows the rule of threes: 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, then you die. Some people can make it a little longer in the best situations. The desert heat and having to walk in sweat isn't the best situation to be in without water. Unless he finds water, he figures, this is his last day.
Where is it? So he rinses out his mouth with a little bit of windshield wiper fluid, and he waits for a while and he spits it out. And he's like, man, is my mouth going numb? Or am I getting dizzy? And he has no idea. Is it just in his mind? He's not sure. So he'll go a little farther, and if he doesn't find any water, he'll actually drink it. We're good. So then he has to face his next harder question. Which way does he go? Does he keep walking the same way as yesterday? Or does he try a new direction? He has no idea what to do. And looking at the hills and the dunes around him, he thinks he knows the direction he was heading before. He's just going by a feeling. He points himself somewhat to the left, and then he just starts walking. As he walks, the day starts heating up. The desert, too cold just a couple of hours before, soon becomes an oven once again. He sweats a little at first, then stops. He starts getting worried at that. He knows when you've stopped sweating, you're in trouble. It's usually right before heat stroke. He decides that it's time to try that windshield wiper fluid. He can't wait any longer, and if he passes out, he's dead. He stops in the shade of a large rock, swallows the bottle out, opens it, and takes it. He swallows it all. He slowly swallows it all, making it last as long as he can. Feels so good in his dry, cracked throat that he doesn't even care about the nasty taste. He takes another mouthful and makes it last too. Slowly, he drinks half the bottle. He figures since he's drinking it, he might as well drink enough to make the difference and keep himself from passing out. He'll quit worrying about denaturing the wiper fluid. If it kills him, it kills him. If he didn't drink it, he'd die anyway. Besides, he's pretty sure that whatever substance they denature the fluid with is just designed to make you sick. They keep their way of keeping winos from buying cheap wiper fluid for the ethanol content. He can handle throwing up if it comes to that. Okay, alright. So he's walking. And he's walking in the hot, dry, windless desert. So sand, rocks, hills, dunes, the occasional scrawny cactus or dried bush, no sign of water. Sometimes you'll see a little movement to one side or the other, but whatever moved is usually gone before he can focus his eyes on it. Gee. Probably birds, or like lizards, or like a mouse. Maybe snakes. Maybe a snake. Though they usually move more at night. So he's careful to stay away from them, because he doesn't know what it's going to be. After a while, he begins to stagger. He's not sure if it's fatigue. Heat stroke might be finally catching up to him, and maybe he was wrong, and the denaturing of the wiper fluid was worse than he thought. Jeez. I was sick yesterday. He tries to steady himself and keep going. After more walking, he comes to a large stretch of sand. This is good. It's good. He knows he passed over a stretch of sand in the SUV. He remembers doing donuts in it, or at least he thinks he remembers. Yeah, probably not a bad idea. Mine broke.
Would you wear one?
I would wear one, but I don't have it. Mine broke. He's getting woozy enough and tired enough that he's not sure what he remembers anymore, or if he's hallucinating. He thinks he remembers it, so he heads off into it, trying to get to the other side, hoping that it gets him closer to town. You got another one? I think I might have one in my backpack, but it's in the other room. Yeah. After more walking, yeah, we already did that part. So he's heading off to town, and he thinks he was. He's not sure anymore. He's not even sure how long he's been walking anymore. Is it still morning? Has it moved into the afternoon? Is the sun going down again? It's got to be afternoon. So he walks through the sand, and after a while, he comes to this big dune. This is bad. He doesn't remember any dunes. Or at least, he doesn't think he remembers any. This is bad. All the same, he has no direction to go. So what does he do next?
Too late to turn back now. He figures that he'll get to the top of the dune and see if he can see anything from there that can help him find the town. He keeps going up the dune. Halfway up, he slips in the bad footing of the sand for the second or third time and falls to his knees. He doesn't feel like getting back up, since he'll just fall down again. He keeps going up the dune on his hands and knees. While crawling, if his throat weren't so dry, he'd laugh. He's finally gotten to the hackneyed image of a man lost in the desert, crawling through the sand on his hands and knees. It would be the perfect image, he imagines, if only his clothes were more ragged. The people crawling through the desert in the cartoons always had ragged clothes, but his have lasted without any rips so far. Somebody will probably find his desiccated corpse half buried in the sand years from now, and his clothes will still be in fine shape. Shake the sand out, give them a good wash, and they'd be wearable again. He wishes his throat were wet enough to laugh. He coughs a little instead, and it hurts. He finally makes it to the top of the sand dune. Now that he's at the top, he struggles a little, but manages to stand up and look around. All he sees is sand. Sand and more sand. Behind him, about a mile away, he thinks he sees the rocky ground he left to head into the sand. Ahead of him, more dunes, more sand. This isn't where he drove his SUV. This is hell, or close enough. Again, he doesn't know what to do. He decides to drink the rest of the wiper fluid while figuring it out. He takes out the bottle and starts removing the cap when he glances to the side and sees something in the sand. At the bottom of the dune, off to the side, he sees something strange. It's a flat area in the sand. He stops opening the bottle and tries to look closer. The area seems to be circular, and it's darker than the sand, and there seems to be something in the middle of it, but he can't tell what it is. So he looks as hard as he can, but still can't tell from here. He's going to have to go down there and look. He puts his bottle back into his pocket and starts to stumble down the dune. After a few steps, he realizes that he's in trouble. He's not going to be able to keep his balance. After a couple more sliding, tottering steps, he falls and starts to roll down the dune. The sand is so hot that he thinks he's caught fire on the way down, like a movie car wreck flashing into flames as it goes over the cliff, before it ever even hits the ground. He closes his eyes and mouth, covers his face with his hands, and waits to stop rolling. He stops at the bottom of the dune. After a minute or two, he finds enough energy to try to sit up and get the sand out of his face and clothes. When he clears his eyes enough, he looks around to make sure that the dark spot on the sand is still there and he hadn't just imagined it. Seeing the large, flat, dark spot on the sand still there, he crawls towards it. He'd get up and walk towards it, but he doesn't seem to have the energy to get up and walk right now. He must be in the final stages of dehydration, he figures, as he crawls. If this place in the sand doesn't have water, he'll likely never make it anywhere else. This is his last chance.
His last chance. Ooh. So finally he reaches the area. We already did that, didn't we? Okay, no, so I'm right here. Right here? All right. So he gets closer and closer, but he still can't see what's in the middle. It's really hard to focus, and lifting his head is just too much effort. So he just keeps crawling. So finally he reaches the area, and it takes him like a minute before he realizes that he's not on sand. He's on like a dark stone with some kind of marking on it, a pattern. It's cut into it. He's too tired to stand up and try to see what the pattern is, so he just keeps crawling. He crawls through the center where his blurry eyes see something in the middle of the dark stone area. His mind, detached in a strange way, notices that either his hands or knees, it's my brain, notices that either his hands and knees are so burnt by the sand that they no longer feel pain, or this dark stone in the middle of a burning desert doesn't seem to be hot. It almost feels cool. He considers lying down on the nice cool surface. Cool, dark stone. Not a good sign. He's got to be hallucinating this. He's probably in the middle of a patch of sand, already lying face down and dying, and just imagining the whole thing, a desert mirage. Soon the beautiful women carrying pitchers of water will come up and start giving him a drink. Then he'll know he's gone. He decides against laying down on the cool stone, because he's going to die in the middle of a hallucination. He at least wants to see what's in the center before he dies. So he keeps crawling, and all of a sudden he hears this voice. And he could have sworn that someone just said, "Greetings, traveler. You do not look well. Do you hear me?" He stops traveling. He stops crawling. He tries to look up where he is on his hands and knees, but it's too much effort, so he tries something different. He rolls over and leans back, trying to sit up on the stone. After a few seconds, he catches his balance and avoids falling on his face. Sits up and tries to focus his eyes. They're blurry. So he rubs his eyes with the back of his hand and tries again. It's better, he can see. So he's sitting in the middle of this large, flat, dark expanse of stone, and directly next to him, about 3 feet away, is a white, pole or post, about 2 inches in diameter, and sticking out about 4 or 5 feet out of the stone, at an angle. And wrapped around this white rod is what must be like a 15-foot-long desert diamondback rattlesnake, with a hovering tail and rattles seemingly prepared to start rattling. I got an ad for a casino. So he stares at the snake in shock. He doesn't have the energy to get up and run away. He doesn't even have the energy to crawl away. It's his final resting spot. No matter what happens, he's not going to be able to move. So at least dying from a bite from it would be quicker than dying of thirst. And he'll face his end like a man. That's better. So he struggles to sit up a little straighter. And the snake keeps watching him. He lifts one hand and flicks it in the snake's direction. The snake watches the hand for a moment, then goes back to watching the man. Maybe the snake just doesn't want to bite him. Hasn't rattled yet. It's a good sign. Maybe he isn't going to die of a snake bite. He then remembers that he'd looked up when he reached the center because he thought he heard something. He's still really woozy and he feels like he might pass out. The sun's beating down on him and he's now on this nice stone. He doesn't have anything to drink. He doesn't have anything to drink. And he might have heard a voice. The stone does not look natural. The white post doesn't look natural. None of this is normal. So maybe the snake is like a pet, and that's why it isn't biting. So he clears his throat to say, "Hello." Jeez, I don't know why I did that. That was a bad idea. But he's too dry. All that comes out is like a cough. There's no way he's going to be able to drink without... There's no way he's going to be able to talk without something to drink. So he feels his pocket, and the bottle of wiper fluid is still there. He pulls out the bottle, and he falls on his back while he's pulling it out. Ain't good. He doesn't have a lot of time left before he dies. So he gets the bottle open. He manages to get it to his lips, and he pours some fluid into his mouth. He swallows it. He coughs a little. His throat feels better. So he might be able to talk now. So he tries again, ignoring the snake. He turns to look around, hoping to spot of the owner of this place, and he croaks out, "Hello!" It was such a bad idea. I don't know why I did that. He goes, "Hello? Is there anyone there?" He hears from his side,
"Greetings. What is it that you want?" He turns his head back to the snake. That's where the sound seemed to come from. The only thing he can think of is that there must be a speaker hidden under the snake, or maybe built into that post. He decides to try asking for help. "Please," he croaks again, suddenly feeling dizzy. "I'd love not to be thirsty anymore. I've been without water for a long time. Can you help me? Looking in the direction of the snake, hoping to see where the voice was coming from this time, he is shocked to see the snake rear back, open its mouth, and speak. He hears it say, as the dizziness overtakes him and he falls forward, face first on the stone, "Very well, come up." A piercing pain shoots through his shoulder. Suddenly he is awake. He sits up and grabs his shoulder, wincing at the throbbing pain. He's momentarily disoriented as he looks around, and then he remembers. The crawl across the sand, the dark area of the stone, the snake. He sees the snake, still wrapped around the tilted white post, still looking at him. He reaches up and feels his shoulder, where it hurts. It feels slightly wet. He pulls his fingers away and looks at them. Blood. He feels his shoulder again. It feels like his shirt has 2 holes in it, 2 puncture holes. They match up with the 2 aching spots of pain on his shoulder. He has been bitten by the snake. It'll feel better in a minute. Oh, wait, sorry. It'll feel better in a minute. He looks up. It's the snake talking. He hadn't dreamed it. Suddenly he notices he's not dizzy anymore. And more importantly, he's not thirsty anymore. At all. Have I died? Is this the afterlife? Why are you biting me in the afterlife? Sorry about that, but I had to bite you, says the snake. That's the way I work. It all comes through the bite. Think of it as natural medicine. You bit me to help me? Why aren't I thirsty anymore? Did you give me a drink before you bit me? How did I drink enough while unconscious to not be thirsty anymore? I haven't had a drink for over 2 days. Well, except for the windshield wiper fluid. Hold it. How in the world does a snake talk? Are you real? Are you some sort of Disney animation? No, says the snake. I'm real as you or anyone is, anyway. I didn't give you a drink. I bit you. That's how it works. It's what I do. I bite. Plus, I don't... What?
That's his thing.
That's his thing. It's what he does.
Classic.
Shh.
It's
We haven't heard his name.
classic.
Or whenever. Plus, I don't have hands to give you a drink, even if I had water just sitting around here. The man sat stunned for a while. Here he was, sitting in the middle of the desert on some strange stone that should be hot but wasn't. Talking to a snake that could talk back and had just bitten him, and he felt better. Not great. He was still starving and exhausted, but much better. Not great. But he was no longer thirsty. Go stop it.
Oh.
He had started to sweat again, but only slightly. He felt hot in the sun, but it was starting to get lower in the sky, and the cool stone beneath him was a relief. He could notice now that he was no longer dying of thirst. I might suggest that we take care of that methanol that you now have in your system with the next request, continued the snake. I can guess why you drank it, but I'm not sure how much you drank or how much methanol was left in the wiper fluid. That stuff is nasty. It'll make you go blind in a day or 2 if you drink enough of it. Next request, said the man. He put his hand back on his hurting shoulder and backed away from the snake a little. That's the way it works, if you like, that is, explained the snake. You get 3 requests. Call them wishes if you wish. The snake grinned at his own joke, and the man drew back a little further from the show of fangs. But there are rules, the snake continued. The first request is free. The second requires an agreement of secrecy. The third requires the binding of responsibility. The snake looks at the man seriously. By the way, the snake says suddenly, my name is Nathan. Old Nathan. Old Nathan, Samuel used to call me. He gave me the name. Before that, most of the bound used to just call me Snake. But that got old, and Samuel wouldn't stand for it. He said that anything that could talk needed a name. He was big into names. You can call me Nate, if you wish. Again, the snake grinned. Sorry if I don't offer to shake, but I think you can understand. My shake sounds somewhat threatening. The snake gave his rattle a little shake.
Nate?
Nate? The snake? My name is Jack, said the man, trying to absorb all of this. Jack Sampson. Can I ask you a question? Jack said suddenly. What happened to the poison, in your bite? Why aren't I dying now? How did you do that? What do you mean by that's how you work? That's more than one question, grins Nate, but I'll still try to answer all of them. First, yes, you can ask me a question. The snake's grin gets wider. Second, the poison is in you. It changed you. You now no longer need to drink. That's what you asked for. Or, well, technically you asked to not be thirsty anymore, but anymore is such a vague term. I decided to make it permanent. Now, as long as you live, you shouldn't need to drink much at all. Your body will conserve water very efficiently. You should be able to get enough from just from the food that you eat, much like a creature of the desert. You've been changed. For the third question, Nate continues, you are still dying. Besides the effects of that methanol in your system, you're a man, and men are mortal. In your current state, I give you no more than about another 50 years. Assuming you get out of this desert alive, that is. Nate seemed vastly amused at his own humor, and continued his wide grin. As for the fourth question, Nate said, looking more serious as far as Jack could tell, as Jack was just now working on his ability to read talking snake emotions from snake facial features. First, you have to agree to make a second request and become bound by the secrecy, or I can't tell you. Wait, joked Jack, isn't this where you say you could tell me but you'd have to kill me? I thought that was implied. Nate continued to look serious.
Yeah. So Jack, he leaned a bit further, and he remembered again that he was asking a 15-foot poisonous reptile with a reputation for having a nasty temper. So he's like, so what is this bound by secrecy stuff? And can you really stop the effects of methanol? And he thinks for a second. He's like, what do you mean methanol anyway? I thought these days they used ethanol and wiper fluid. Don't they just denature it? And Nate responds, they might, I don't know. I haven't gotten out in a while. Maybe they do. All I know is that I smell methanol on your breath and on that bottle in your pocket, and the blue color of the liquid when he pulled it out to drink. Some let me guess that it was wiper fluid. I assume they still color wiper fluid blue. Yeah, they do. I figured. As for being bound by secrecy, with the fulfillment of your next request, you will be bound to say nothing about me, this place, or any of the information I tell you after that. When you decide to go back out to your kind, you won't be allowed to talk about me, write about me, use sign language, charades, or even act in a way that will lead someone to guess correctly about me. You will be bound by secrecy. Of course, I'll also ask you to promise to not give me away, as I'm guessing you're a man of your word. You'll never test the binding anyway, so you won't notice. Nate said the last part with utter confidence. And Jack, who's always prided himself on being a man of his word, felt a little nervous at this. So he's like, hey, Nate, who are you? How did you know that? Are you omniscient or something? He goes, well, Jack, I can't tell you that unless you make that second request. And he goes, jeez. So he goes, what's this about a second request? What can I ask of you? Are you allowed to tell me that? He goes, sure, yeah, you're allowed to ask for changes to yourself. They're like wishes, but they can only affect you. Oh, and before you ask, I can't give you immortality or omniscience or omnipresence, but I might be able to make you gaseous and yet remain alive. Then you could spread through the atmosphere and sort of be omniscient, but what good would that be? You still won't be omniscient, and thus you could only focus on like one thing at a time. Not very useful, but like that's just my opinion. So Nate stopped and realized that Jack was kind of staring, and he goes, well, anyway, I'd probably suggest giving you permanent good health. It would negate the methanol. You'd be immune to most poison and diseases, and you tend to live for a very long time, barring an accident. And you'll have a really good tendency to recover from accidents as well. It might seem like a good choice for a request like me. Cure the methanol poisoning, huh? And keep me healthy for a long time? Doesn't sound bad. And it has to be a request about the change to me. I can't ask to be rich, right? Because that's not really a change to me. Right. Could I ask to be a genius and perfectly healthy? That'd take 2 requests, Jack. I figured so. But could I ask to be a genius? I could be like a really smart scientist or the best athlete. Nate responds with, well, I could make you very smart. But that wouldn't necessarily make you the best scientist. It could make you really athletic, but it doesn't really make you the best athlete. You've heard the saying that 99% of genius is hard work. I haven't heard that saying. Well, there's some truth to that. I can't give you the talent, but I can give you the talent, but I can't make you work hard. It all depends on what you decide to do with it. Alright, I think I get it. And if I get a third request, after this one, maybe. It depends on what you decide then. There are more rules for the third request that I can only tell you about after the second request. You know how it goes. Nate looked like he'd shrug, but he doesn't have shoulders. So, he goes, alright, well, I'd rather not be blind in a day or two, and perfect health doesn't sound bad, then consider that my second request. Officially. Do I need, like, a sign on blood or something? He's like, nah, pull out your hand or your heel or whatever part you want me to bite. I have to bite you again. Like I said, that's how it works. That's what I do. I'm Nate the Snake. I bite people. So, he winced a little, and he felt in his shoulder where the last bite was, and it didn't hurt anymore. Just like Nate had said. That made Jack feel better about the biting business, but still standing still when a 15-foot snake sunk its fangs into you, Jack stood up. Ignoring how good it felt to be able to stand up again, the hunger starting to gnaw at his stomach, Jack decided where he wanted to get bitten. Despite knowing it wouldn't hurt for that long, Jack knew it wasn't going to be easy. Hey, Jack, is that someone else coming up behind you? Jack spun up and looked around. What else could it be? Who else is there? And nobody was. He's like, wait, what's going on? There's nobody there. What was Nate? And then Jack let out like this loud yell as he felt two fangs sink into his ass through his jeans. Can I say that? No.
What?
No one's gonna get this far.
No.
No one is going to get this far.
Yeah.
Literally, no one's going to get this far to
Yeah,
find out.
fine.
Hi, person who got this far. So Jack sat down carefully, favoring his more tender buttock. I could say buttock.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would have decided eventually, Nate. I was just thinking about it. You didn't have to hoodwink me like that. I've been doing this for a long time, Jack. You humans have a hard time sitting still and letting a snake bite you. And besides, admit it, it's only been a couple of minutes and it doesn't hurt anymore. It's because of the health benefit with this one. I told you you'd heal quickly now. Yeah, well, still, it's the principal thing, and nobody likes being bitten in the butt. Could you at least got my calf or something? It's like more meat. Less chance you have to accidentally like kick me. It's like, all right, fine, yeah, you're right. So tell me all these wonderful secrets that I now qualify to hear. And he's like, all right, do you want to ask questions first, or do you want me to just start talking? Just talk. I'll sit here and try not to think about food. We could try to go rustle up some food for you if you want. Yeah, he's like, hey, you didn't tell me you had food around here. What do we have? Am I walking distance to the town? Can you magically whip up some food along with the other powers? Jack was almost like shouting now. I was thinking more I could flush something out of its hole and bite it for you, and you could skin it and eat it, assuming you have a knife. It's like, I think I'll pass. I can last a little longer before I get desperate to eat a desert rat or whatever else it is you find out here. And there's nothing to burn. I'd have to eat it raw. No thanks, just talk. And he's like, all right, but I better hurry before you start looking at me as food.
Nate reared back a little, looking around for a second, and then continued. You, Jack, are sitting in the middle of the Garden of Eden.
What?
Jack looked around at the sand and dunes and then looked back at Nate skeptically. Well, that's the best I can figure it anyway, Jack, said Nate. Stand up and look at the symbol on the rock here. Nate gestured around the dark stone they were both sitting on with his nose. Jack stood up and looked. Carved into the stone was in a bas relief was a representation of a large tree. The angled pole that Nate was wrapped around was coming out of the trunk of the tree, right below where the main branches left the trunk to reach out across the stone. It was very well done. It looked more like a tree that had been reduced to almost 2 dimensions and embedded in the stone than it did like a carving. Jack walked around and looked at the details in the fading light of the setting sun. He wished he'd looked at it while the sun was higher in the sky. Wait, the sun was setting. That meant he was going to have to spend another night out here. Jake looked out across the desert for a little bit and then came back and stood next to Nate. Jack did that and came back to sit next to Nate. In all the excitement, I almost forgot, Nate, said Jack. Which way is it back to town, and how far? I'm eventually going to have to head back. I'm not sure I'll be able to survive by eating raw desert critters for long, and even if I can, I'm not sure I'll want to. It's about 30 miles that way, Nate pointed, with the rattle on his tail this time. As far as Jack could tell, it was a direction at right angles to the way he'd been going when he was crawling there. But that's 30 miles by the way the crow flies. It's about 40 by the way a man walks. You should be able to do it in about half a day with your improved endurance if you head out early tomorrow, Jack. Jack looked out the way the snake had pointed for a few seconds more, and then sat back down. It was getting dark. Not much he could do about heading out right now, and besides, Nate was just about to get to the interesting stuff. Garden of Eden, as best you can figure it? Well, yeah, as best as I and Samuel could figure it anyway, said Nate. He figured that the story just got a little mixed up. You know, snake in a tree offering temptations, making bargains, that kind of stuff. But he could never quite figure out how the Hebrews found out about this spot from across the ocean. He worried about that for a while. Garden of Eden, huh? Said Jack. How long have you been here, Nate? No idea, really, replied Nate. A long time. It never occurred to me to count years. Until recently. And by then, of course, it was too late. But I do remember when this whole place was green, so I figure it's been thousands of years at least. So are you the snake that tempted Eve? Said Jack. Beats me, said Nate. Maybe. I can't remember if it was the first one of your kind that I talked to was female or not. I never got a name, but it could have been. And I suppose she could have considered my offer to grant requests a temptation, though I've rarely had refusals. Well, how did you get here then, and why is that white pole stuck out of the stone there? Asked Jack. Dad left me here, or I assume it was my dad. It was another snake, much bigger than I was back then. I remember talking to him, but I don't remember if it was in a language or just some kind of understanding that he, or just kind of understanding what he wanted. But one day he brought me to this stone, told me about it, and asked me to do something for him. I talked it over with him for a while and then agreed. I've been here ever since. What is this place? Said Jack, and what did he ask you to do? Well, you see this pole here sticking out of the stone? Nate loosened his coils around the tilted white pole and showed Jack where it descended into the stone. The pole was tilted at about a 45-degree angle and seemed to enter the stone in an 18-inch slot cut into the stone.
He's so good at measurements.
He is.
Knows exactly 15 foot long. And
Oh,
18-inch slot.
because of his...
No, he
Wait,
didn't-
perfect
he didn't
health?
Get a gene.
Oh,
he
yeah.
never became a genius. This is just
Oh, yeah.
like he's just really good at measuring.
Yeah. Jack leaned over and looked. The slot was dark, and the pole went down into it as far as Jack could see in the dim light. Jack reached out to touch the pole, but Nate was suddenly there in the way. You can't touch that yet, Jack, said Nate. Why not? Asked Jack. I haven't explained it to you yet, replied Nate. Well, it kind of looks like a lever or something, said Jack. You'd push it that way, and it would move in the slot. Yep, that's what it is, replied Nate. What does it do? Asked Jack. End the world? Oh, no, said Nate. Nothing that drastic. It just ends humanity. I call it the lever of doom. For the last few words, Nate had used a deeper, ringing voice. He tried to look serious for a few seconds, and then gave up and grinned. Jack was initially startled by Nate's pronouncement, but when Nate grinned, Jack laughed. Ha! He almost had me fooled there for a second. What does it really do? Oh, it really ends humanity, like I said, smirked Nate. I just thought the voice I used was funny, didn't you? Nate continued to grin. It's kind of funny. A lever to end humanity? Asked Jack. What in the world is that for? Why would anyone need to end humanity? Well, replied Nate, I get the idea that maybe humanity was an experiment, or maybe the big guy just thought that if humanity started going really bad, there should be a way to end it. I'm not really sure. All I know are the rules and the guesses that Samuel and I had about why it's there. I didn't think to ask back when I started here. Rules? What rules? Asked Jack. There are rules that I can't tell anybody about it or let them touch it unless they agree. The rules are that I can't let anybody about it. Oh, God, I'm reading so awfully today.
Because we've been reading.
I guess we've been reading a lot. Yeah, like, oh my God. The rules are that I can't tell anybody about it or let them touch it unless they agree to be bound to secrecy by a bite. Oh my God. And that only one human can be bound in that way at a time. That's it, explained Nate.
The round dog.
Jack looked somewhat shocked. You mean that I could pull the lever now? You'd let me end humanity? Yep, replied Nate, if you want to. Nate looked at Jack carefully. Do you want to, Jack? No, said Jack, stepping a little further back from the lever. Why in the world would anyone want to end humanity? It'd take a psychotic to want that. Or worse, a suicidal psychotic, because it would kill him too, wouldn't it? Yep, replied Nate, being as he'd be human too. Has anyone ever seriously considered it? Asked Jack. Or any of those bound to secrecy, that is? Well, of course, I think they've all seriously considered it at one time or another. Being given that kind of responsibility makes you sit down and think, or so I'm told. Samuel considered it several times. He'd often get disgusted with humanity, come out here, and just get hold of the lever for a while. But he never pulled it, or you wouldn't be here. Nate grinned some more. Jack sat down, well back from the lever. He looked thoughtful and puzzled at the same time. After a bit, he said, so this makes me the judge of humanity? I get to decide whether they keep going or just end? Me? That seems to be it, agreed Nate. What kind of criteria do I use to decide? Said Jack. How do I make this decision? Am I supposed to decide if they're good, or too many of them are bad, or that they're going the wrong way? Is there a set of rules for that? Nope, replied Nate. You pretty much just have to decide on your own. It's up to you. However you want to decide it, I guess that you're just supposed to know. But what if I get mad at someone, or some girl dumps me and I feel horrible? Couldn't I make a mistake? How do I know that I won't screw up? Protested Jack. Nate gave this kind of snake-like shrug again. You don't. You just have to try your best, Jack. Jack sat there for a while, staring off into the desert that was rapidly getting dark, chewing on a fingernail. Suddenly, Jack turned around and looked at the snake. Nate, was Samuel the one bound to this before me? Yep, replied Nate. He was a good guy. Talked to me a lot. taught me to read and brought me books. I think I still have a good pile of them buried in the sand around here somewhere. I still miss him. He died a few months ago. Sounds like a good guy, agreed Jack. How did he handle this when you first told him? What did he do? Well, said Nate, he sat down for a while, thought about it for a bit, and then asked me some questions, much like you're doing. What did he ask you, if you're allowed to tell me? Asked Jack. He asked me about the third request, replied Nate. Aha, it was Jack's turn to grin. And what did you tell him? I told him the rules for the third request. That to get the third request, you have to agree to this whole thing. That if it ever comes to the point that you really think that humanity should be ended, that you'll come here and end it. You won't avoid it, and you won't wimp out. Nate looked serious again. And you'll be bound to do it too, Jack. And you'll be bound to do it too, Jack. Jack looked back out into the darkness for a while. Nate watched him, waiting.
Man, I'm feeling like Jack the way I'm running out of water here. I'm running
Yo.
Yo, that's
For
me.
real.
I'm running out of
Jack for
water.
real.
Dude, epic Jack moment? Is that the wiper fluid?
Yo, Nate the Snake reference?
Dude, is that a Nate the Snake
Bro.
reference? You drinking water? Alright, so Jack's like, what did Samuel ask for his third request? And Nate, he was grinning again, and he was like, he asked for wisdom. So much wisdom, as much as I could give him. And Jack's like, alright, give it to me. Give me the wisdom. Same stuff that Samuel asked for. If it helped him, maybe it'll help me. It did help him, right? He said it did, but he seemed a little quieter afterward. Like he had a lot to think about. Probably because he was wise. Well, yeah, I can see that. So just give it to me. He turned away, and bent over slightly, and he tensed up. Same thing happened, and he goes, you remember that you'll be bound to destroy humanity if it ever looks like it needs it to happen. Like, right, Jack? And he's like, yeah, I got that. And again, he hasn't gotten bit yet, but and then Nate goes, and do you remember that you'll turn bright purple and grow big horns and extra eyes? Did you know that? Yeah, hey, wait a minute. Purple. With the moonlight, Jack could see that the lever extended from its slot, because Nate wasn't around anymore. And then Nate yelled, just kidding, and then bit him.
Oh my god.
Dude, Nate got you. Dude, Nate got you.
Oh, that's the worst timer song. It is so shocking.
Oh, man. Alright. Is it recording? It's recording. Whoa. Such a bad alarm song. Alright, so, he gets bit. And he's standing on the edge of this dark stone. And his feet are out in the sand. And he's like, man, I'm wise. So he's sitting there. Nate had left for a while. So he's wondering where Nate was. And he had come back with a desert rodent. And was now wrapped around the lever. His tongue was flicking out into the desert air. The only sign that he was still awake. And Jack was sitting there, and he thought, like, Nate, do accidents count? Because what do you mean? He was like, accidents. If I accidentally fall on the lever without meaning to, does that still wipe out humanity? It's like, yeah, that sure does, Jack. I'd suggest you be careful about that if you start feeling wobbly. He goes, does it have to be me that pulls the lever? That's the rule, Jack. Nobody else can pull it. I mean, like, does it have to be my hand? Could I pull the lever with, like, a rope tied to it, or push it with a stick, or throw a rock? It's like, yeah, those should work, though I'm not sure how complicated you could get. Samuel thought about trying to build some kind of remote control for it, but he gave up. Everything he built would be gone by the next sunrise if it was touching the stone or over it. I told him that in the past, others that had been bound had tried to bury the lever so they wouldn't be tempted to pull it, but every time the stones or sands or whatever had disappeared. It was, wow, cool. And he leaned back with his elbows and kept him off of the stone to look at the sky. Because, Nate, how long did Samuel live? One of his wishes was for health too, right? And Nate's like, yeah, he lived 167 years. And he's like, wow, that's a lot. That's almost like 140 more years if I'll live that long. Do you know what he died of, Nate? He died of getting tired of living. And Nate was like, Samuel, he didn't know what was going to happen. He wasn't going to be able to stay in society. He figured that he'd eventually see him still alive and start questioning it, so he'd decide that he'd have to disappear for a while. He faked his death once, but it changed his mind. He decided it was too early and he could stay for a little longer. He wasn't very fond of mankind, but he liked the attention most of the time. His daughter, and then his wife almost, died, or did him in through. He didn't stay in society much longer after that. He eventually came out here to spend time talking to me and thinking about pulling the lever. A few months ago, he told me he'd had enough, it was his time. And then he just died. He made his fourth request, Jack. There's only one thing you can ask for the fourth request. The last bite. So after a bit, Nate continued, and he told me he was tired. He told him it was his time. He reassured me that someone new would show up like he always had. And after another pause, Nate finished. Samuel's body disappeared off the stone with the sunrise. And Jack laid back looking at the sky, leaving Nate alone with the memories. Next morning, Jack woke up, and he's feeling a little chilly. So he gets the directions back to the town, and he starts walking there, and he's like, Nate, I'll be back soon. So he caught a bus. He makes it back, and he catches a bus. He showed up for work the next day, a little worse for wear, and with a story about getting lost in the desert and walking back out. Again, he couldn't mention Nate. Within a couple of days, Jack had talked with a friend to tow a truck to get his SUV back out of the desert. They found it within a couple hours of searching, and they towed it back without incident. Jack was careful to not even look in the direction of Nate's leather, though their path back didn't come within sight of it. Before the next weekend, Jack had gone to a couple stores, including a bookstore, and gotten his SUV back from the mechanic, with a warning to avoid any more joyriding in the desert. On Saturday, Jack headed back to see Nate. Jack had parked a little way out of the small town near Nate, loaded up his new backpack with camping gear and things he was bringing for Nate, and then started walking out. So it wasn't unheard of to go camping in the desert, but it was a little suspicious, so he was trying to leave, no trail. So Jack had bought some more books for Nate, some recent books, some magazines, some newspapers, and he spent the weekend with him, and then headed out again, telling Nate he'd be back soon. 4 months later, Jack was back to see Nate again. This time, he brought a laptop with him, a very specially modified laptop. It had a solar recharger, special filters and seals to keep out of the sand, a satellite link-up, a special keyboard with a joystick that Jack kind of hoped that Nate would be able to use, because he's like a 15-foot rattlesnake, and it had been hacked to not give out its location to the satellite. After that, Jack could email Nate to keep in touch, but he still visited him fairly regularly, like once or twice a year. And after that first year, Jack just quit his job. He was like, you know what, I got the wisdom, I got knowledge, I could live for 150 years, I don't want to work a 9 to 5. So he went back to school, and eventually he started writing. Maybe it was his wisdom, maybe a new perspective. He was really good at writing. People liked what he wrote, and he became very well known for it. And after a time, Jack bought an RV and started traveling around the country for book signings and readings. But he still remembered to stop by and visit Nate. On one of the visits, Nate seemed a bit quieter than usual. Not that Nate had been a fountain of joy lately. Jack's guess was that Nate was probably still missing Samuel, and Jack had tried that. He'd been trying to replace Samuel a bit, but he knows he wouldn't be able to be Samuel. So he was trying to help him through it. And after a while, Nate was like, Jack, I have someone to introduce you to.
Jack looked surprised. Someone to introduce me to? Jack looked around and then carefully looked back at Nate. This something to do with the big guy? No, replied Nate. This is more personal. I want you to meet my son. Nate looked over at the nearest sand dune. Sammy. Jack watched as a 4-foot-long desert rattlesnake crawled from behind the dune and up to the stone base of the lever. Yo, Jack, said the new, much smaller snake. Yo, Sammy, replied Jack. Jack looked at Nate. Named after Samuel, I assume? Nate nodded. Jack, I've got a favor to ask you. Could you show Sammy around for me? Nate unwrapped himself from the lever and slithered over to the edge of the stone and looked across the sands. When Samuel first told me about the world and brought me books and pictures, I wished that I could go see it. I wanted to see the great forests, the canyons, the cities, even the other deserts, to see if they felt and smelled the same. I want my son to have that chance, to see the world, before he becomes bound here like I have been. He's seen it in pictures over the computer that you brought me, but I hear that it's not the same. The being there is different. I want him to have that. Think you can do that for me, Jack? Jack nodded. That was obviously very important to me, Jack. So Jack didn't even joke about, taking a rattlesnake out to see the world. Yeah, I can do that for you, Nate. Is that all you need? Jack could sense that was something more. Nate looked at Sammy. Sammy looked back at Nate for a second and then said,
I gotta go pack. I'll be back in a bit. Nice to meet you. So he slithered off, and Nate watched him disappear, and he goes, Jack, this is my first son. It's my offspring through all my years. You don't even want to know what it took for me to find a mate. But I've had a son for a reason. I'm tired. I'm ready for it to be over. I needed a replacement. Alright, so I think I was started... Welcome back to part 2 of the Nate the Snake joke. Things have turned dire, but we're still gonna finish this joke. I'll start. So, as we last checked off, you'll remember this. Nate the Snake needs a replacement. So Jack's considering this, and he's like, "So you want to come see the world, or you want to watch The Lever?"
He doesn't need he needs a replacement, but right now he's asking Jack to take his son
to
see the world before he replaces him as the snake.
So you guys like, so you're ready to come see the world, and you want him to watch The Lever while you're gone, and Nate's like, "No, Jack, you're better than that. You already figured this out. I'm bound here. There's only one way for me to leave this place. I have to die, and I am ready to die." Nate the Snake is ready to die. So Jack's looking at him, and
Keep going.
So Jack's looking at Nate, and he could tell that Nate had thought about this for a while. There was no convincing him out of it, and Jack knew that if he left here, he would be there for 100 or 200 years, and he might be tired of life. So Jack could understand that Nate wanted to die. So Jack's like, "What do you want me to do?" And Nate's like, "Thanks, Jack. I only want 2 things. Show Sammy the world, let him get his fill of it, let him get it, and then 2, give me the 4th request. I can't just decide to die. Not any more than you can. I won't even die of old age like you eventually will, even though it'll be a long time from now. I need to be killed. Once Sammy is back here, ready to take over, I'll be able to die, and I need you to kill me." What does he say next, Hazen? Then I'll go to you.
I even thought about how poisons and other drugs won't work on me. And I've seen pictures of snakes that were shot. Some of them live for days, so that's out too. So I want you to bring back a sword. Nate turned away to look back to the dune that Sammy had gone behind. I'd say an axe, but that's somewhat undignified, putting my head on the ground or a chopping block like that. No, I like a sword, a time-honored way of going out, a dignified way to die, and most importantly, it should work, even on me.
"You willing to do that for me, Jack?" Nate turned back to look at Jack. "Yeah, Nate," replied Jack solemnly. "I think I can handle that." Nate nodded. "Good." He turned back toward the dune and shouted, "Sammy, Jack's about ready to leave." Then quietly, "Thanks, Jack." Jack didn't have anything to say to that, so he waited for Sammy to make it back to the lever, nodded to him, nodded a final time to Nate, and then headed into the desert with Sammy following. Over the next several years, Sammy and Jack kept in touch with Nate through email as they went about their adventures. They made a goal of visiting every country in the world and did a respectable job of it. Sammy had a natural gift for languages, as Jack expected he would, and even ended up acting as a translator for Jack in a few of the countries. Jack managed to keep the talking rattlesnake hidden, even so, and by the time they were nearing the end of their tour of countries, Sammy had only been spotted a few times. While there were several people that had seen enough to startle them greatly, nobody had enough evidence to prove anything, and while a few wild rumors and stories followed Jack and Sammy around, nothing ever hit the papers or the public in general. Nothing ever hit the... Yeah, okay. When they finished the tour of countries, Jack suggested that they try some undersea diving. They did, and spelunking. They did that too. Sammy finally drew the line at visiting Antarctica. He'd come to realize that Jack was stalling. After talking to his dad about it over email, he figured out that Jack probably didn't want to have to kill Nate. Nate told Sammy that humans could be squeamish about killing friends and acquaintances. So Sammy eventually put his tail down, as he didn't have a foot, and told Jack that it was time. He was ready to go back and take up his duties from his dad. Jack delayed it a little more by insisting that they go back to Japan and buy an appropriate sword. He stretched it out a little more by getting lessons in how to use the sword. But eventually he learned as much as he was likely to without dedicating his life to it, and was definitely competent enough to take the head off a snake. It was time to head back and see Nate. When they got back to the U.S., Jack got the old RV out of storage, where he and Sammy had left it after the tour of the 50 states. He loaded up Sammy and the sword, and they headed for the desert. When they got to the small town that Jack had been trying to find those years ago when he'd met Nate, Jack was in a funk. He didn't really feel like walking all of the way out there. Not only that, but he'd forgotten to figure the travel time correctly, and it was late afternoon. They'd either have to spend the night in town and walk out tomorrow, or walk in the dark. As Jack was afraid that if he waited one more night he might lose his resolve, he decided that he'd go ahead and drive the RV out there. It was only going to be this once, and Jack would go back and cover the tracks afterward. They ought to be able to make it out there by nightfall if they drove, and then they could get it over tonight.
I'm gonna just finish it.
Okay.
All right. So, Jack told Sammy over email that they're coming down, and everything's going well until they got to the sand dunes. Jack had been nursing the RV along the whole time over the rocks, the creek beds, revving the engines a few times. They almost got stuck. When they came to the dunes, Jack didn't really think about it. He just downshifted and headed up the first one. By the third dune, Jack started to regret that he decided to try driving on the sand. The RV was fishtailing and losing traction. Jack was having to work it out, each dune slowly, and was trying to keep from losing control each time they came over the top and slid down the other side. Sammy had come up to sit in the passenger seat, coiled up and laughing at Jack's driving. As they come over the top of the fourth dune, the biggest one yet, Jack saw that this was the final dune. The stone, the lever, and somewhere Nate waited below. Jack put on the brakes, but he'd gone a little too far. The RV started slipping down the other side. Jack tried turning the wheel, but he didn't have enough traction. He pumped the brakes, no response. They start sliding down the hill faster and faster. Jack felt a shock go through him as he realized that if they were heading towards that lever, that would end humanity. And he looked down, and the RV was directly on course for it. If Jack didn't do something, the RV would hit it and end humanity. Jack steered more and more frantically, trying to get traction. It still wasn't working. The dune was too steep and the sand too loose. In a split second, Jack realized that his only chance would be once he hit the stone around the lever. He should have traction on the stone for just a second before he hit the lever. He wouldn't have time to stop, but he would be able to steer away. Jack got a little bit of a better grip on the steering wheel and tried to turn the RV a little bit, and every little bit would help. He had to time this just right. The RV got to the bottom of the dune, sliding at an amazing speed on the sand. Just before they reached the stone, Jack looked across it to check if they were still heading for the lever. They were. But Jack noticed something else that they hadn't seen from the top of the dune. Nate wasn't wrapped around the lever. He was off to the side of the lever, but still on the stone, waiting for them. The problem was, he was waiting on the same side of the lever that Jack had picked to steer towards to avoid the lever. The RV was already starting to drift that way, a little in its mad rush across the stand, and there was no way that Jack was going to be able to ground the lever, to go around the lever. So Jack had an instant of realization. He was only going to have to hit the lever or run over Nate. He looked at Sammy and saw that Sammy had realized the same thing. He took a firm grip of the steering wheel as the RV ran up on the stone, shouting to Sammy as he pulled the steering wheel. You want to know what he said, boys?
What did he say?
What did he say?
Better Nate than lever. And he ran over the snake. The end.
Good show. Quite.
Better Nate than lever.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Leave you with a look at the birthdays and lunch menu.
That's not okay.
I don't. We now leave you with a look at the birthdays and the lunch menu. I don't know how I want to do this other. Maybe I'll have it slowly fade out.